Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 4th of November. I'm Robert Barwick, and I'm joined today by CEC researcher Jeremy Beck. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, US election could hinge on Glass-Steagall. Prepare for a Brexit surprise. And Australia needs Hazelwood and more to power an economic recovery. Before we get into this week's show, Jeremy, I have to just remind the viewers, we need to start, I'll remind them every week actually before it happens, on the 31st of December at midnight this year, Channel 31, people who are watching this on television, free-to-air television, Channel 31 or Channel 44 will go offline. We all go boo right now, and we blame Malcolm Turnbull. He gave us a year's grace, but that ends now. So there's only a bit less than 2 months to go on the Channel 31 and Channel 44 broadcasts around Australia. However, they go off the air, but they will continue to broadcast through their internet platforms, right? And they'll just continue regardless. So this show, the CEC Report, will not be on free-to-air TV after the 31st of December, but it will be available on the internet. It'll be available on the Channel 31, Channel 44 platforms online, if people start watching that. Or if you want the show when it's most current, you go to it on our website or on YouTube, right? On the CEC Citizens Electoral Council channel on YouTube. And then you can start getting the show when it's the most current. And probably the easiest thing is to go to YouTube to our channel and subscribe to it, and you will get a notice every week as soon as it's produced, which is usually about 24 hours after we've actually shot the show like we're doing right now. So that's just prepare for that, and it's an unfortunate happening, but we have to make the best of a bad situation, and we're going to continue this show into the future. And I'll also say now, because sometimes we get rushed at the end and don't give it enough do enough justice to it, Jeremy. A lot of people say to us, can we get a transcript of the show? Well, the CEC Report is not a scripted show. Yes, we've got notes here, but they're just notes to give us a bit of structure of what we want to cover. All the information we go through, though, is generally available in the CEC's weekly publication, the Australian Alert Service. And anybody can call in and get a free copy of this magazine if you're interested in what we're talking about. We encourage you to do that. Call in on the 1-800-636-432 number, and you can always get a free copy and read the detailed analysis that we print in there. I'm a writer, Jeremy's a writer, and we're both editors of the publication. We have a team here that work on producing this every week, and it's an excellent publication.
You won't get that from Rupert Murdoch.
You will not get that from Rupert Murdoch, hell no. All right, so that said, let's get into this week's show. First, United States election could hinge on Glass-Steagall. Prepare for a Brexit surprise. Right now, Jeremy, the US election could go either way. Of course, that's stunning because about 2 weeks ago, apparently Hillary was 10 points ahead in the polls or something, right? But it's all gone pear-shaped. Now, there's a positive side to it and a negative side. The negative side is the media attention went off Trump and the women and onto her. And again, I feel I have to say this, I don't like, Trump personally, per se.
I don't think anyone does, really.
No one does. No one would condone that. The problem is, what you do know is that there's a lot of hypocrisy in the attention on him, because so much of that garbage has gone on behind the scenes for so long. And yes, Hillary Clinton's husband has been involved in very similar stuff all that time, and she happily stayed with him, not because she values the institution of marriage, you suspect, but because they had a partnership for power, right? And that's so that they pursued that. The attention that's gone on to her is on issues that are, in terms of how countries are run, much more serious, right? And as the attention's gone on to her, she has dived in the polls, and this is neck and neck. That's the negative side of it. The positive side of the change is that Donald Trump has consciously started focusing on issues rather than going off on tangents that are important to the American people, right? And one of those issues that has become a major issue in the final stages of the campaign is Glass-Steagall. Now, remember in the in July, when both parties had their nominating conventions, Glass-Steagall was put on the platform of both parties at the time. But have you heard anything about it since?
Not in any of the three debates.
Exactly, it didn't come up at all.
Not one word.
And,
and it is on both party platforms.
That's right.
But obviously Wall Street is trying to, use as much power as possible. And Hillary, she's completely owned by Wall Street, so it's no surprise at all that she doesn't want to mention it at all.
That's true, and that's one of the things that's come out, her relationship to Wall Street. And she's opposed to Glass-Steagall as well. The reason it got onto the Democratic Party platform was because of Bernie Sanders. He made it the issue through his whole campaign, and he did a very good campaign. In fact, he was most likely robbed in terms of the result, and the WikiLeaks emails have shown that. But it was on the platform. So yes, we haven't heard anything about it since. Well, once he started once Trump, I suspect, or Trump's people got a sense that he was in for a chance, they started focusing on specific issues, and including in that is Glass-Steagall. So on the 26th of October, in a speech in Charlotte, North Carolina, Donald Trump said that he would pursue financial reform and that Wall Street must be held to accountable. And this speech was to an audience of African Americans largely, right? So he's structured what he says in that context. And just have a look at what he says, because it's very clear cut.
I will also pursue financial reforms to make it easier for young African Americans to get credit to pursue their dreams in business and create jobs in their communities. It's going to be beautiful. Such talent. There's such a potential talent out there. It's so incredible, and it's totally being wasted by politicians that maybe don't want to see it happen. Dodd-Frank has been a disaster, making it harder for small businesses to get the credit they need. You folks know that. The policies of the Clintons brought us the financial recession through lifting Glass-Steagall, pushing subprime lending, and blocking reforms to Fannie and Freddie. Two friendly names, but they're not so friendly. It's time for a 21st century Glass-Steagall, and as part of that, a priority on helping African American businesses get the credit they need.
Now, according to insiders, this speech that he delivered there, where he read it very carefully, right? And often I ridicule, these presidents who become so dependent on their teleprompter. They seem so wonderful, but they never read their speeches. He's much happier not reading his speeches, except now that he wants to make sure he doesn't go off on tangents, he's reading it. Apparently, the insiders in the Trump campaign said this was his most planned speech he ever gave and the most coherent speech he ever gave, and they wanted to make sure they focused on this issue. One of his advisors in economics is a Wall Street veteran named Wilbur Ross. Now, and Wilbur Ross is a guy going back to the 80s who was one of these, takeover merchants and whatever, right? Someone that I wouldn't necessarily approve of, but there's a wave of these guys that post the 2008 crash were the first to put their hands up and said, okay, this crash proves that a lot of what we did was wrong. It was a disaster. The deregulation was a disaster, right? So there's a lot of them that have done that, very conspicuously done it. There's more in Wall Street, though, that haven't. Have said, no, we're hanging on to the system we've got, right? So Wilbur Ross, he elaborated on the fact that this Glass-Steagall thing that Trump said is very, very important. He said the big banks need to be broken up, quote, they're too complex and too complicated internally, right? Now, that was on the 26th of October. On the 1st of November, this indicates just how much this could be an issue, one of the issues on which the election outcome hinges. Because if Hillary refuses to talk about it because of her personal opposition, she might lose on the result on the basis of this. Because listen to this, there was a poll of 1,000 voters in Ohio. 1,000 of them were polled in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Missouri, which are the 4 key states that they're fighting over at the moment. And the question was, what should be done about Wall Street banks? 70% said restore the Glass-Steagall Act.
Look at all these Bernie Sanders supporters, and Bernie Sanders did call for Glass-Steagall. If Hillary, and it looks like she's not going to mention it at all, if she continues this up till the last minute, well then a number of those Bernie Sanders supporters could vote for Trump.
That's right. And so we don't know how genuine Trump is about this, but we do know he put it on their platform before the Democrats did. And I suspect that the people around him are genuine, right? They might be opportunistic, but people know, what they do know is this is what the public want. Very, very important. All right, we'll take a quick break and then we're going to talk about, after the break, what is the likelihood of an upset, election upset. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing United States election could hinge on Glass-Steagall, prepare for a Brexit surprise. So, Australian viewers, Jeremy, may be a bit perplexed by the fact that despite everything he's said and what is said about him, Donald Trump might be about to win the US election. And just so you know, I shouldn't admit this, I have a standing bet riding on the outcome, which is a slab of beer, if I'm allowed to admit that, because I have an American friend who insisted to me 12 months ago Donald Trump wouldn't even get nominated, and I said he might, and now the bet is I said now he's reassuring me he'll never win, and I said, well, I think he might, because there are other factors beyond what's in the media. That's the point. The media distorts everything. So
people are very angry out there. They've lost their jobs. Whole areas have been smashed. They don't want more of the same. Now, they don't like Trump, and there's good reasons not to like him, but they don't want more of the same either. That's
the point. So you think about this to Australian viewers. Think about this. You desperately want change. And what you know is every election the politicians promise change. They say it, but they never do it. What you've got in Trump, whether you like him or not, you know he's different, right? And if you want to be entertained but also see just how serious this is, look up on YouTube Michael Moore and Donald Trump, and there's a 3-minute video you can watch of Michael Moore, the famous filmmaker, who's a real arch lefty, hates Trump and whatever, but he's from the industrial heart of America, Flint, Michigan, where the car centre of the United States, that's all been destroyed by free trade, right? And he describes in there why he thinks there's a chance Trump could win, because the American working class male is so destroyed, they've only got one thing left to their lives, and that's their right to vote, and they want to punish the system for what's happened. So this is quite serious. So anyway, my point is the media distorts what's really going on. That's more the truth of what's going on, and Donald Trump has started focusing on that. So and the issues he hits are issues people hate. So he's hitting trade hard, right? Free trade has destroyed America. He's broken that with that consensus. And he's correct on that, right? We've been saying that longer than Donald Trump has. He's correct on that. He's also hitting hard, going after a more sacred cow, which is wars. Right? He is the first guy to say this has been a disaster. He's denounced Iraq, he's denounced Libya, he's denounced Syria, he's denounced the whole kit and caboodle. So what we want to do is we're going to play another clip from the same speech. Remember, this was a speech that was the most carefully planned one that he's done, where he goes after Hillary Clinton on this question, and he says what she's doing could end up in world war. Just watch that.
For 30 years she's been talking. For 30 years, only bad things happened for her. She tried to build democracy in Libya, and she failed. She tried to build democracy in Iraq, and she failed. She tried regime change in Egypt, and that was a disaster. She pressed regime change in Syria, and that failed. She tried a Russian reset that was laughed at. Laughed at. Putin. He has no respect for her whatsoever. She tried an Asia pivot, and that failed. Now Hillary Clinton wants to confront nuclear-armed Russia with a shooting war in Syria that could very well lead us into World War III. For what?
So, and that here you've got a presidential candidate warning of the possibility of world war. The world hasn't been in this situation since the 1960s, right? But it's a deadly serious possibility. So, of course, what the Clinton camp does, they've come out with this total childish paranoia. It's the Russians, it's the Russians, it's the Russians. What we want to end this segment on is we want to quote, Vladimir Putin had some things to say about the US election in a remarks he made to her. There's an annual event in Russia called the Valdai Discussions, and he was asked about this, so he made a few comments. And the gist of what he said is he pointed out how politics is changing around the world, and he used Brexit as the example, right? Because Brexit was a surprise. People didn't see Brexit coming. And the point he made is that, well, he said this, quote, referendums and elections will increasingly often create surprises because, quote, ordinary citizens are losing trust in the ruling class. And then he says, this is not the fringe taking over. The fringe, this is what Putin says, is, quote, the expanding class of the supranational oligarchy and bureaucracy, which is in fact often not elected and not controlled by society or the majority of citizens. And of course, the majority of citizens want a future, and they're sick of these unaccountable people controlling their lives. Putin declared that the entire globalization project is in crisis, and this is a consequence of Western powers choosing power and control over dialogue and collaboration. Quote, the system of international relations is in a feverish state and the global economy cannot extricate itself from the systemic crisis, Putin said. And then he called for a Marshall Plan where countries of the world work together to rebuild the hotspot, the trouble spot of the world, the Middle East. Let's have a Marshall Plan and work together to do it. That's what Putin said. And what has got Trump in the most trouble in the United States in terms of what he's politically said? And you know, I follow this closely, but I'm hoping the public's picked it up. It's not all the extraneous stuff. Every time he said, what's wrong with working with Russia, right?
Yeah, let's work with them. Yeah, it'd be nice if we had good relations with Russia.
And apparently that's the most radical thing you can say, Jeremy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, because there's a whole industry built on profiteering from having the world, you know, on the brink of war with Russia, right? And unfortunately, they might think they can do it in a controlled way, but as we've been warning for a long time, that's, and as Trump said, now Trump's advisor, by the way, on Syria and on these affairs, General Michael Flynn, is the guy who in 2012, as the head of the US Defense Intelligence Agency, said to Barack Obama, the policy you're pursuing in Syria is going to lead to an Islamic State. And he was ignored. He said he was willfully ignored. That's what happened. He was right. He is now Trump's advisor on this, right? And they are determined to make a change on this, and they are getting crucified for it. So anyway, Vladimir Putin's conclusion is, look, expect more Brexit surprises. That's becoming the mainstream. And that's why, in that general context, don't be surprised. We don't know. By the time you watch this, the election might be over and it might, you know, Hillary might have won all states. But I doubt it. And don't be surprised if the person going to be sworn in January is named Donald J. Trump. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Jeremy can do all the talking on electricity. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, Australia needs Hazelwood and more to power an economic recovery. So yesterday, in terms of when we're shooting the show, the French company that owns the Hazelwood power station, and is Hazelwood the biggest in Australia? It's certainly the biggest in Victoria.
No, it's the second biggest.
Second biggest in Australia.
1,600 megawatts.
It's the biggest in Victoria though, right?
No, it is.
The other ones?
One of the Loy Yang ones
Oh,
is
okay.
bigger.
So these are, so people who don't live in Victoria may not know that we have this brown coal east of Melbourne in Gippsland there, which General Sir John Monash, our hero from World War I, led an engineering team to work. It's glorified mud. And they worked it out how you could burn that for electricity. And since then, those power stations that developed there in burning brown coal have powered Australia's leading manufacturing state. Historically, this is the industrial heartland of Australia, Victoria, right? The leading manufacturer in Australia. Well, that's one of the cornerstones of that, the Hazelwood power station, is going to shut down now. And what does this mean for us, Jeremy?
It would be an absolute disaster. I mean, we're reliant on cheap power for manufacturing. We could lose the Portland aluminium smelter. Electricity prices, no doubt, will go through the roof. All across the board.
And everyone's expecting that.
Yeah, it's not just the community there in the Latrobe Valley. It's not just Victoria. It's the entire national security, because we're a net exporter of power to Tasmania, to Tasmania, to South Australia, to New South Wales, through all these interconnectors. And now, if it is closed, it will mean we'll be a net importer of electricity.
You can't just take 20% of baseload.
Well, it's 25% of baseload.
25% of baseload out of the picture and not have that. So let's discuss why is it shutting? What's the rationale? First of all, is it a dysfunctional power station?
It's an old power station, it works. It's not dysfunctional, it works. Sure, it could be shut down once we've put more baseload power online, but you don't shut down power plants first. You build power plants, then you shut down the old ones. They're doing it in the wrong order. And in fact, they're not even planning an order. They're not even planning to build new baseload power stations.
That's right. They're living it up to the national electricity market and extra so-called renewables.
Yeah, it's an old station that works. And they say, oh, it's the most polluting. Well, if you look at the EPA figures for all the air pollution, and they've got a lot of monitoring stations in Maui and Traralgon and all these places, and also in Melbourne, you'll find that most of the time the air is rated very good, and that's by the Environment Protection Authority, very good. Occasionally it gets downgraded to good. If you look at the same ratings in Melbourne, quite often it's actually worse than in the Latrobe Valley because of all their vehicle emissions. So it's not really causing a pollution problem, except when we had the Hazelwood mine fire, and there's more than enough evidence that that fire would never have got anywhere near that big had they had the workforce and the water, or the fire extinguishing systems there that was gutted through the privatisation program.
So the French owner said it's not economically viable, but that actually doesn't mean that the power station itself isn't profitable. What it means is all these extra conditions overlaid on it makes it unprofitable.
Well, the coal royalties were tripled. The Daniel Andrews government tripled the coal royalties.
Now, coal royalties is what, just for the viewers' benefit, so this is what a state in Australia would charge, would make Rio Tinto or whatever pay to dig up our coal and ship it overseas. What Daniel Andrews' government did is this is coal that we use for our electricity, and he just went and whacked it and tripled coal. And I'm not sure that kind of tripling of coal royalties has happened anywhere else in Australia.
I'm not aware of it. But the point is that why isn't the whole thing run by the state for the benefit of the state and the common good of the Australian people? This is completely wrong that we privatised it in the first place. And it should be renationalised. Look, we've got to keep it open. We can't afford this plant to be closing.
Because we risk losing the Portland smelter, but we've already lost one aluminium smelter. And so Portland is the only one we've got left here in Victoria.
Yeah, the only one in Victoria.
There's only 4 aluminium smelters left in Australia. We used to have more than that. When we smelt our own aluminium, we're not sending raw materials overseas. We're actually capitalising on the value in that aluminium here in Australia. If we don't have this kind of baseload power, we're going to lose that, right? We've lost 600 jobs at Ford, right? We're going to lose the other manufacturing. All the things, cheap electricity is what everyone acknowledges used to give us our manufacturing advantage, and we've deliberately destroyed that capacity, right? And
I also think on the very, very hot days in the summer, we could easily have a blackout or a brownout, because if you have calm conditions, the wind turbines, they're not going to produce any power at all. You can't rely on wind. You know, sometimes it'll blow, sometimes it won't blow. You can't run an economy like that. Yeah, we put out a press release on this week, so if people are interested in more details, contact us. The Brickworks Chief Executive, Lindsay Partridge, said it's like the government's policy is they want to wipe manufacturing out. Well, we don't. We want to keep Australia as a manufacturing economy and get it back, so we want to keep this power station open. That's it for this week's CEC Report. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next week for more.